Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we get going today, I just want to draw everyone's attention to the announcement just within the last hour of the International Court of Justice, the highest placed judicial body in the entire UN system, which all 193 members are obligated by treaty and mutual agreement to adhere to. This includes Israel and the United States. The International Court of Justice just issued its verdict with a petition filed by South Africa ordering Israel to stop its offensive in Rafah, cease blockages of the entry points for humanitarian aid, provide humanitarian assistance at scale for the Palestinian people in an urgent, immediate basis. In the last 2 weeks, the Israelis have forced nearly 900,000 Palestinians out of the Rafah area, which is in southern Palestine. Over the course of the last 7 months, they've essentially carpet bombed the Gaza Strip, forcing 1.5, 1.6 million Palestinians into a very small area around the town of Rafah in South Gaza. And now they're bombing Rafah and forcing them to go back. Many of the Palestinians now have moved, trying to escape the Israeli genocide upwards of a dozen times. Dozens of people are being killed every single day. The Israelis have been targeting homes, so children, mothers, the elderly are being killed now on a routine basis, both in the Gaza Strip and on the West Bank. This comes in the immediate aftermath of the International Criminal Court, not part of the UN system, but let's see. Someone just peeked in there. But part of the international judicial system. They are preparing, at the request of their special prosecutor, criminal charges of crimes against humanity against Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister, Gallant, also the three individuals in the leadership of Hamas. So we are finding ourselves in a situation as the decimation of Rafah continues, with increasing pressure from the international community, which, with the exception of the United States, UK, and Germany, basically, which are supporting Israel in a full throttle way, the entire rest of the world understands that what's happening is genocide, understands that the Palestinian people need to be treated on the same basis as the Jews in Palestine and in Israel, and have been supporting a two-state solution. You've even seen Spain, Norway, and Ireland break from the G7 consensus and announce that starting in 4 days, they're going to be recognizing Palestine as a state. We'll be watching and providing information about this as probably the greatest mental health crisis in our world today. The process of genocide against the Palestinians has so motivated the world conscience that we are seeing an activation sensitization of our mental health, literally, around whether the world will come together to stop genocide. It's an extraordinary moment, and we've been tracking this on Humanity Rising, and to see the International Criminal Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court defy U.S. pressure, which has been considerable, and that of Great Britain and the G7, and still take a stand for justice and humanitarian morality, really should empower all of us to take similar stands and to continue to speak out until the genocide is stopped and the Palestinian people gain their right for the same sovereignty as the Jewish people have in that part of the world. So thank you, everyone. I framed our discussion today within the context of mental health because that's what we want to talk about. Today, we're going to be talking about new therapies in mental health, specifically for military personnel and veterans. But of course, this is applicable to people around the world. We know that the latest polling is showing that the mental health of our species, of people around the world, whether they're in the military or civilian sectors, is becoming increasingly fragile, increasingly under assault, whether it's social media or just simply the news, and the sense of hopelessness that's pervading upwards of 65, 70% of our young people, the escalating cases and reports of anxieties and depressions and drug offenses and drug disorders and addictions of all kind. The mental health of our species, of humanity itself, we're not doing very well. And that's what's true. And that's why we're seeing genocide in Palestine. That's why we're seeing all the economic and political turbulence and runaway climate change, because the mental health of human beings has been radically destabilized and made fragile. And in those circumstances, people do strange things against their own self-interest. So the issue of mental health, whether at the personal or, as I framed it, the global level, is an issue of utmost importance, particularly among our young. So thank you, everyone, for joining Humanity Rising as we continue to monitor unfolding world events and take on some of these deeper issues that often are challenging, but always edifying if we have the courage to look the light right in the eye. So it's my pleasure right now to introduce Marie Castle, Dr. Marie Castle, who took her PhD from Ubiquity University. She was one of our stellar students and has a background in psychotherapy with a particular focus on holotropic breathwork and other innovative therapies that really deal with people's psycho-emotional and mental health. She's been on Humanity Rising a number of times. So Marie, thank you so much for convening this program, and I turn the session over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's always a pleasure to be here. And yeah, just really appreciate that, that I'm going to be co-presenting with two colleagues of mine today on these particular subjects, and how, like you said, important this is for everyone across the globe. Mental health is definitely a serious issue. I know of simple statistics of 1 in 5 people suffer from mental health, but I think I think it's much more than that. So, yeah, I just want to start with a little bit of a couple of personal statements about myself, and then move into some of, my most favorite teacher that I've had my whole life is Dr. Stan Groff. So talk a little bit about his specific work, and then I'll introduce Cheryl and Brian, who I have utmost respect and admire very much. So I just, want to start saying this, and this is all, my personal statements are pertinent, but my mother passed away just a couple of weeks ago, and so I'm preparing her services and mass, which actually is tomorrow. And so in the middle of preparing for this presentation, I had a thought of my father's passing, which was 24 years ago. And then the realization that was the start of my whole culmination of where I'm at today with all of the different research that I've done and working with people with the Groff holotropic breath work, but also beyond with Jung's work and different energetic, acupuncture and energy medicine. And what stood out for me is, for my dad's passing compared to my process with my mother's, it was just that something has shifted. And particularly what I noted with my father's passing is that I had a different perspective or sort of process from my siblings, because I had just gotten home from my first Groff holotropic breath work back in 1999. That was with Stan Groff and Jack Cornfield, 100 and some people there. And that something shifted in me. And I just knew that my dad's, and I probably wouldn't put it this way then, but like his consciousness was still alive. I knew that inherently from having had these experiences with non-ordinary states. And that was all brand new to me. So I think that, it's important to mention that because of my recent research with Irvin Laszlo, and his discussions on the Akashic fields and many, many, many other much more research that he's provided. But I recently did a collaboration of Laszlo, Jung, and Stan Groff, and their research on consciousness. And it's just interesting to have that realization that it's only words that we use, but it's all the same idea and concepts. It's just different ways of describing it. And I'll go particularly into Stan Groff's research here in just a minute. But, the other personal statement that I wanted to bring up, and this is relating to mental health, but veterans particularly across the globe, is that I suffered from suicidal tendencies from an early age, from my early adult, early teenage years into 20 years ago. So this is 30, 40 years ago. And I think for me, with having done Stan Groff's work, that what I know really made a difference was not just the non-ordinary states of consciousness, but also Stan's context that he brings to this work, to the Groff holotropic breath work, and also his formulation and particular protocol of psychedelic therapy and integration. So he said, "This too shall pass." This is me back in, I'm thinking 35, 40 years ago. hearing him say, "This too shall pass," when I had all of these feelings, and realizing that that really made a difference. Knowing, and he talks about it with his basic perinatal matrix, like I said, I'll go into in just a few minutes, but also that he talked about people that have this tendency towards not wanting to be here or ending their life are just really craving these ethereal dimensions of our consciousness. And we don't know how to tap into it. 40 years ago, right? More so now. But just correlating that stood out to me so much. And then I knew that when I have these feelings, that really that's something I can do, is access these non-ordinary states of consciousness. So I was fortunate to have healed all of that. And I know that perhaps for, veterans, it may be a different feeling that comes up for wanting to, end your life or have those urges. But, perhaps it's mostly related to trauma and PTS and all of the healing that wants to happen in the consciousness from those experiences, from combat experiences, or just the constant high stress. So yeah, I just really wanted to mention that, and then I wanted to go into the aspects of Stan Grof's particular categories of the varying states of consciousness that he's most noted for. And he has 4, and particularly in the Psychology of the Future is a great book that I first became so enamored by and really helped me a lot. But then now today he has The Way of the Psychonaut, Encyclopedia Volume 1 and 2. And I'm fortunate to be on as a faculty for Grof Studies, where we're doing a graduate program collaborated with Ubiquity University. And we're just so super excited about all of the research that's going to come forward under Stan Grof's belt from people that's coming forward and taking our courses and then collaborating and getting their graduate degree with Ubiquity. So it's just a really, really exciting time to know that we have all of this energy moving forward with more and more research. But just to kind of give a brief and talk about that, and then just say a couple more things, and then I'll introduce Cheryl and Brian. That Stan's work starts out with 4 categories. So it's the biographical, the sensory, the basic perinatal matrix, which is at or around our birth, and then the transpersonal realms of consciousness. And he's talking about these categories from perspectives that we can have in our non-ordinary states of consciousness. So the biographical is pretty self-explanatory. That relates to anything from our birth onward. Sensory, the same thing in our body. We can have so much somatic healing from the experiences of inner journeys and even, with psychedelic therapy, not just the Grof breath work. And then the transpersonal is basically everything else. But what I want to go into is the basic perinatal matrix, because I feel like this is really important and integral with healing moving forward in a collective of our global society. That understanding our birth, as Stan explains, is the first trauma of our life experience, and that having some metaphoric understanding of it, recognizing that this is this can be considered, our birth can be considered a blueprint or an imprint of our life moving forward, and give us some framework of why we have particular patterns or tendencies, and that knowing about our birth and relating the metaphoric perspective of it can be very healing. So not only that, but also in our non-ordinary states of consciousness, we access these realms, and then this can be provide a lot of resolution for a lot of the different idiosyncrasies that come up for us in our life, across the board. So particularly the basic perinatal matrix is in 4 categories that Stan has listed, and that's the actual being in the womb, when the contractions begin, the moving through the birth canal, and then the actual birth. And then, of course, we have to consider what a C-section birth experience might be, but I'm not going to cover that today. So the basic, BPM1 has to do with being in the womb, and can have these feelings of like cosmic, oceanic, floating, having everything that you need given to you, you're provided for, you're being fed, taken care of, held. So it can be very beautiful, like the Great Mother, being held by the Great Mother. And then I'm just going to read a couple of Stan's specific descriptions from his book in the Psychology of the Future. So also realistic recollections of good womb experiences, like I said, oceanic type of ecstasy, nature at its best, Mother Nature, experience of cosmic unity, visions of heaven and paradise. And then we can also have the bad womb experience as well, diseases and emotional upheavals of the mother, and then paranoid ideation, unpleasant physical sensations, hangover, chills, and spasms, blah, blah, blah. So I'll just leave it with that, and gives an understanding, though, of what that could look like, both in your everyday life and then also in these non-ordinary states of consciousness. And then for the basic perinatal matrix 2, this is when the contractions begin. And this can be this feeling of being pushed down and compressed, being pushed towards a void. You go from this feeling of beautiful, freedom and having everything, this bliss, this paradisiacal experience, to all of a sudden being a victim and spasms and darkness. So like the void. And then Stan writes, cosmic engulfment, immense physical and psychological suffering, unbearable and inescapable situations that will never end. It can feel like being stuck, or people are depressed and there is no way out, that people can stay in this depending, on the birth experience and how long your this part of the process was with contractions. And I know, like, particularly for my son, it went on for 15 hours, it seemed like. And then inferiority feelings, apocalyptic view of the world, horrors of wars and concentration camps. Again, there's a long list, I could go on. So moving towards the basic perinatal matrix 3, he describes intensification of suffering to cosmic dimensions, borderline between pain and pleasure. It's this kind of hope in the midst of chaos, or this light. You see the light at the end of the tunnel, but you're still struggling, still pushing through. It can be active engagement in fierce battles, atmosphere of wild adventures, dangerous explorations, intense sexual orgiastic feelings and senses of harems and carnivals. Again, I could continue and go on and on. And, you know, there's this maybe sense of a collective perspective of our psyche as well. And for me personally, I feel like that we're all in some stage of this BPM 3, coming out of BPM 2, especially after COVID. And then explaining, you know, the actual being born birth experience, BPM 4, he describes enormous decompression, expansion of space, illuminative type of ecstasy, visions of gigantic halls, radiant light and beautiful colors, heavenly blue, golden, rainbow, peacock feathers, feelings of a rebirth and redemption, appreciation of simple way of life, brotherly feelings, humanitarian and charitable tendencies, occasionally manic activity and grandiose feelings. Yeah, and then I just want to point out the humanitarian feelings, and that there's this sense when people are in this BPM 4 in a non-ordinary state of oneness, or just, you know, there is no separation. So I want to also explain that these BPM 4 stages can show up in our non-ordinary states and be intermittent. It can just show up organically in our psyche, and it's really about the understanding that our inner healer knows best. So having, you know, some of these experiences not without this context, I feel like is kind of a disservice to this work. And that's why for me particularly, it's really important to spread Stan Grof's research for more people to have this understanding, especially with all the psychedelic therapy and research that we are doing right now. And Cheryl and Brian are going to give you some of that research specifically with a PowerPoint, but I just want to give an introduction of them, and I don't know that I could ever give them you know, the justice of this that they deserve, but I will do my best. So Cheryl and Brian are both retired military of 30 years of service, and both are flight surgeons, and also both were commanders in the Air Force. And they are very well respected in their community, or I mean in their specific fields, and also have a long list of honors for their services. And they often get many invitations for lectures and presentations. I know they were both recently just at the Aerospace Conference, and then at the Special Operations Command for Healing for War Veterans. And then specifically, Brian was just recently, just a couple of years ago, Chief Medical Officer for the Veterans Affairs in Orlando, Florida, of the facility that he ran and oversaw the whole facility. And then also noted for training physicians to become NASA flight surgeons. Cheryl specifically her mission in the Special Operations Command Medical Unit, serving 30,000 beneficiaries in a high operation tempo mission. And her research in aerospace medicine, operational medicine, veteran health, and neuroplasticity. So both are certified in aerospace and occupational medicine. They have a long list of publications, both of them, a long list of professional associations, and like I said, are often invited for lectures around the world. And that they're both now co-founder of Kinetic Medical Consultants, and they are both FAA medical examiners specific to drug and alcohol recovery. So it was a great pleasure and honor to introduce them and have them here today with Humanity Rising. So thank you both. If you're ready to come on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mari. I would have talked about more of my nefarious things, but let's see real quick. I need to make sure I'm sharing correctly and that I'm sharing the right screen. Does that look correct?
Looks like you want to go into the presentation mode.
How's that?
Yeah.
No, you've got presenter mode on public screen.
Okay, swap displays. There we go.
This is your brain.
Sorry.
This is drugs. This is your brain.
Okay, now I'm having issues. Here we go. Let me restart this up real quick.
This is your brain. This is drugs. This.
Okay, I think we're in the right place now. Does that all look good?
Yes, you got it. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So again, yes, I'm Brian Pinkston. I'll be talking about drugs today, believe it or not. And so how we got into this, I've been looking at this, and Cheryl and I have been working on this for about 5 years, interested in this area. And it was started through our work with veterans. And in fact, I met one that was, many of them that were amazing. One was particularly interesting in his work in neuroscience research. He was basically he considered himself an apex predator, was out there behind the lines doing all kinds of stuff, working for the government, and then had a combat-related accident which left him paraplegic. And so he had a really difficult time going, what is this new body and what is my purpose in life? So he brought us into this space through all the modalities that we're talking about, including breathwork, technodelics, everything that we're talking about, and started leading us down this path. And then we met Mari and the staff and some of the faculty of Ubiquity at MAPS about a year ago, and things got weird from there in the best possible way. So we'll start there.
This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Sorry about the technical glitches there. This is also your brain on drugs, actually. This is a functional MRI of dopamine receptors in the striatum of the brain. This downregulation of dopamine receptors play a role in all drugs with highly addictive potentials. They cause drug-seeking behavior, and you can see that dopamine on the left-hand side is in a normal subject. Then a month after cocaine use, you see that red has gone away, and then it actually does come back after a period of time. So that's an upregulation of the abstinence of the use of these drugs. Back in 2016, the U.S. Surgeon General released a report on the state of addiction in the U.S. in 2000 at that time. This report described the current science on the brain structures involved with the addiction cycle. These structures include the basal ganglia, the prefrontal cortex, and extended amygdala. And you can see how they all are involved. The prefrontal cortex is involved in the preoccupation and anticipation. Basal ganglia are associated with the binge intoxication, and the extended amygdala are associated with the withdrawal and negative effects. So you could say our current opioid crisis and other drug crisis that we have, that actually Tim Leary's motto or discussion back in the 1960s in the counterculture of turn on, tune in, and drop out would make sense associated with what we're dealing with now. What we really meant by the use of psychedelics is actually they help you help you with your inherent ability that you'll see through other methodologies that Cheryl will talk about as well, to turn on that cerebral structure, that antenna, be able to tune in to certain frequencies with that antenna, and then drop out of those life-devouring tendencies, those life-devouring commitments that don't serve for our better purpose and cause depression and other issues that we see associated with our mental health, including world mental health. Interestingly, though, if you look at this is actually work that's been done by Dr. Robin Carhart Harris and Amanda Fielding in the Beckley Institute out of the UK. And what they did was they did a functional MRI looking at how multiple areas of the brain. This one on the very top row shows how the visual cortex normally functions. And you can see that back in the back of the brain, the occiput receives signals from the eyes and gives you visual signals. And that's how you perceive reality through your vision. On LSD, which is the second row, you can see that multiple other areas of the brain are activated. And we'll talk about how that works, but they're activated. And that's why visual hallucinations or visual, it's not exactly hallucinations because you know that they're not, it's not happening in this consensus reality, that you're actually perceiving feelings and sights and sounds and tastes that are different than what you would normally see. And then the last third row is that delta between the two. So this one is actually quite interesting. This is more fascinating even still, because they were able to map the area of the brain associated with the concept of ego or self versus others. And the way they did this was they had a survey, and when someone said, I'm having what Jung would call ego dissolution, as in I don't see a difference between me and others, as in not non-duality or that there's oneness. This is where it happens, and you can see these parts of the brain when they say they're having this feeling. You can see the parts of the brain that get shut down. So you see the first row is actually the placebo. The second row you see less activity. So what you're seeing, and then the third row shows the delta between the LSD or typical psychedelics and versus the placebo. And what you're seeing is that structures that are involved in what we consider consensus reality, something called the default mode network, is something that's in play here. And the default mode network are things, are structures or connections between structures of the brain that say this is normal. You'll see it actually if you drive home, for example, and you completely forget that how you got there, but you did it. You're in this automatic state, and it's stuff like, hey, if something falls off a table, it's going to hit the floor. If it doesn't hit the floor, you're saying something's abnormal here. So it creates these shortcuts for our brains to function normally and reduce the noise that we could otherwise perceive from the rest of the world. It actually takes several years, till about the age of 7 or 9, before people actually really develop this. This is why kids have more imagination, more creativity. And what happens though in here is once you put somebody on a psychedelic like LSD, especially the classicals, you can see that default mode network falls apart and you start having connectivity between huge areas of the brain. So you can, again, taste sound, hear, and all these different things start getting connected and open up your ability, your portal to perceive that's actually locked inside that default mode network in your brain. So you don't have to believe me, but there are people such as Francis Crick who, there's a myth that he actually was taking LSD when he determined that the double helix for DNA. He did take LSD. It's not quite sure that he was taking it at the time, but Kerry Mullis, who developed the polymerase chain reaction for the replication of DNA, and that we use on a daily basis these days, actually said once he was working this problem, once he sat, it took LSD, he said he sat on the molecule and can see how it all worked out. And so he definitely says this is something that was a tool to help me see, problem solve and see a bigger picture. And so did Steve Jobs. In fact, you can see here, taking LSD was a profound experience, one of the most important things that he can remember in his life that helped him to get where he was. So ethnobotanists Terrence and Dennis McKenna attributed the 300% growth of the human brain over an incredibly short evolutionary period to the stoned ape theory, as in our predecessors were walking along and picking through animal dung and kind of trying to search and hunt animals, and picked up whatever they could to eat, and picked up some mushrooms that actually happened to have some psychedelic effect. And thus it created opening of all those networks and effectively allowed them to be more social, more loving, better hunters, and actually have greater perception outside of just their vision and their smell and other senses, the five senses that we consider normal senses. But believe it or not, many scientists have said, yeah, that's not really the case. And they've attacked it. But if you think about it, what I'm doing right now, if aside from the slides that I'm showing you, the words I'm telling you, if they're creating visual images, they're doing something called synesthesia. And that's exactly what the spoken language is synesthesia. So much of our brains are actually associated with the formation of language. And therefore, it may not be that far-fetched that this helped us in our development. And in fact, if you look back in Spain, between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago, you can see drawings on a cave wall that show mushrooms, and they found some artifacts showing that they used them in ceremonial practices back in those days. And back 2,500 years ago, you can find the Mayan mushroom stones. Those were also used in ceremonial practices back in those, and they found artifacts and found evidence that the mushrooms were there, that they were using them as early as those days. And even the Greeks were using spiked alcoholic beverages for secret ceremonies known as the Eleusinian Mysteries that date back to 1450 BCE to 329. And what happened that changed it was effectively the Romans came in and Christianity took place, and that kind of went by the wayside. But in addition to various herbs, biomolecular archaeologists have reproducibly found alkaloids consistent as part of the mixture. So they were using, and in the barley that they were using to make some of their kind of something between wine and beer, they found that there was a fungus growing on that, and they utilized that fungus, that ergot alkaloid, to create visions. And in fact, in these ceremonies, initiates were reported to have direct audience with the goddesses Persephone and Demeter. With the rise of modern civilization and organized religions, this knowledge was largely lost for thousands of years. That is, until Albert Hofmann, working as a chemist in Sandoz in 1938, synthesized lysergic acid diethylamide 25. And he was actually looking for other uses of ergot. In fact, and he helped develop the drug Metrogen, which is used in deliveries even today. He didn't really see any results out of this LSD-25. He said the laboratory animals just kind of acted weird and didn't really do what they were expecting to do. But for some reason, 5 years later, that drug just kind of spoke to him and said, hey, it's time to bring me back out. He did, and got a little bit on his skin and had some weird effects. And then 3 days later, he decided to take what would be considered a reasonable dose, and then decided that he needed to go home because he thought he was dying. And that actually birthed or inaugurated the Bicycle Day, which is still celebrated today, April 19, 1943, where he was having a dissolution of ego and also all kinds of images that he didn't understand. And the reason why he took a bike was it was during the wartime, and that was the only transportation available. So I wouldn't suggest anybody else trying to reproduce this experiment, but he got through it. So LSD was found to be very psychoactive, and Sandoz sent it out to clinical researchers around the world. And this is where we get back to Dr. Stan Grof's work. He was one of the earliest psychiatrists to use it very effectively for severe mental health conditions, and he was using it in the Czech Republic, and then later went to Johns Hopkins and continued to use it into the 70s until it was made illegal. And we'll talk about that portion of history as well in a minute. But he developed the psychological theories that Dr. Castle was just speaking of. At the same time, there were multiple people looking at different things. And in fact, Dr. Humphrey Osmond of Canada he started using it to treat addictions, and it actually worked pretty well. And so he went back and forth. He was actually pen pals with Aldous Huxley, who wrote the Doorways of Perception, or Doors to Perception. And he also gave a dose to Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Interesting thing with that was Bill Wilson was already in sobriety. He took it and he went, holy cow, I could have saved years of hell if I just had 12 hours of hell and gotten through this. I have the same insight and the realization that substances aren't helping me just as I did for many, many years of hitting rock bottom. So it became kind of a beacon. And it was actually Dr. Humphrey Osmond that coined the phrase, to fathom hell or soar angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic. This was the pen pal back and forth with Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley had another idea, but the contest was won by Dr. Osmond. And so the term psychedelic, coming from the Greek mind manifesting, is what it means, as in taking what's in the mind and manifesting it into your reality. But in the midst of these discoveries, the U.S. became embroiled in the counterculture world in the 1960s. During this time, the CIA played its own role in the spread of LSD through the MK Ultra program. And in fact, people like Ken Kesey and others who wrote One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and then also started the Merry Pranksters and the acid tests that we all have heard of, or maybe have lived through. That all occurred, and Dr. Timothy Leary out of Harvard picked up the mantle and said, I'm going to help this counterculture program, and in the process became named the most dangerous man in the United States. But not before Walter Pankey conducted the Good Friday experiment on April 20th, 1962 at Marsh Chapel at Harvard under Dr. Leary's supervision. He gave psilocybin to a randomly controlled group of theology students. And 25 years later, actually, Rick Doblin went back and did a survey of those students who were theologians, many of them still. And they said that experience was one of the most significant mystical and spiritual experiences of their lives. A high point. Well, they say it's all fun and games until somebody loses an eye by staring at the sun on LSD. And so the government stepped in with the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. Not necessarily because of the medications, although they were being abused and not well understood on how to use them, but also because it was fueling the counterculture. And so most of the drugs that we're going to talk about today are really in this category of Schedule 1, which is drugs that have high potential for abuse and no currently acceptable use for treatment in the U.S. And we'll show how both those things aren't really true at this point in time. And then there's a lack of accepted safety. As you may see at the bottom, fentanyl is Schedule 2, and you know how bad fentanyl is causing problems. I mean, it's a great drug used in the right circumstances, but it has been just horrible for us in a lot of ways in the United States, and yet it's only Schedule 2, saying we can use it from a medical perspective. So when you look at all this would make sense, except the classical psychedelics have a tachyphylaxis, for lack of a better word, a rapidly diminished effect with repetitive use. So if you use mushrooms, a high-dose mushroom one day, it's really hard to really get that effect. It really doesn't work well. Same thing with LSD. You have downregulation and it just doesn't work so well. So it's hard to really have physical dependence on them. It really doesn't exist. And so that's the first strike against putting it into Schedule 1. The other thing is classical psychedelics are serotonin agonists, and you can see serotonin at the top of the page, acting at the 5-HT2A or serotonin receptor, not in the dopamine striatum pathway that we talked about with the drugs of addiction that we saw the Surgeon General talking about in 2016. This includes tryptamine such as LSD. The classicals include tryptamine such as LSD, psilocybin, and DMT that you see here. And you can see all of them have that indole ring, which is, you can see that 6-sided ring and a 5-sided ring right there is kind of the core. That's one of the ways to look at them, okay? And all of these have a good safety profile with a very few exceptions in pre-existing physical and mental health conditions. And again, they have that commonality, recognizability of the indole ring. Ibogaine is another one that you hear about a lot these days. It is one that is having some research. It has the indole ring, but it also has other components to it, making it a little bit more complex. It comes from the iboga tree in Africa, and they've used it for years for treatment of drug substance dependence. And they have, it has been really shown good results also in research here, but it does have some cardiotoxic effects. So it requires really a lot of watching the heart while you're doing this. And so research is ongoing. We'll see where that goes. The phenylethylamines are actually really interesting as well. And one of them is MDMA, which we're hearing a lot about from MAPS. That drug has actually undergone, that medication's undergone 2 phase 3 trials, has completed that, meaning it's been tested on large parts of the population after showing it's effective. And it's actually in the process of FDA drug approval. It will likely go into Schedule 3 later this year. That's what they're expecting, is that sometime this year we'll be at Schedule 3 where we can use it therapeutically, like a benzodiazepine, like Valium or something like that. On the right-hand side, though, you can see the concern here. It looks pretty similar to methamphetamine, and in fact, it has 2 mechanisms of action. It increases dopamine, the feeling of happiness and goodness and all that. But the other thing it does is actually increases serotonin. And so it helps increase feelings of empathy, both towards yourself and others. So it has been used in couples therapy, as well as things like PTSD, where when you approach something, either something that you did or something that was done to you, or feelings of guilt about what you didn't do when something happened to you, you're able to approach it with softer edges, as opposed to, for example, just psilocybin or LSD by itself. So it's really has been proven effective in some of these uses, and Cheryl will talk further about that in the next session here. You can see that it increases endogenous serotonin. So that's one risk, is it can actually deplete some of your own serotonin, making you have a letdown effect afterwards, making you feel maybe a little depressed in the few days afterwards. You don't want to use it a ton. It increases oxytocin, which is kind of that mother-child connection that can occur. And that's why it's called an empathogen, as in giving you empathy to somebody, or entactogen, allowing you to feel what your internal feelings are, even including some of the stuff that's going on your gut as well. Esketamine is kind of a totally different drug, and it's one that's being used a lot for, it's obviously, you've probably heard about it, ketamine as a classic dissociative anesthetic, and it's been used since the 1960s. It has been reformulated to the S isomer of ketamine, which is a little bit easier to get through the nasal passages, and is being used as a methodology for dissociative psychotherapy as well. But it acts in a completely different way than the other ones, and it kind of shuts some things down and dissociates. And the current use right now, the protocols say kind of the psychedelic type or dissociative type of effect is a side effect, kind of ignore it. But there are some of us who are saying that's actually where the meat of the subject is, as Dr. Castle was talking about earlier. Now, so how do we get back to where we were before, and talking about, where we had this 60-year, almost 60-year hiatus, over 50-year hiatus in the research of psychedelics. So with all this goodness, what happened? In fact, it was almost self-censure from any good psychiatrist in their department would say, you don't want to be anywhere near this. This will be a career ender. And we know some people who didn't care and have still researched it and are really kind of now on the leading edge. But what brought this back and why we are here now is largely due to a publication by Dr. Roland Griffiths and his team at Johns Hopkins. He was considered a consummate addictionologist, a specialist, and was really highly regarded. So, and he decided, instead of going just in the standard addiction and use of one of these types of medications, he said, hey, what does it help with spirituality? And in fact, what he did was he took a group of people who had fear and anxiety associated with a terminal diagnosis, and a pretty quick terminal diagnosis. And I'll show you a video from one of those here in a moment. But his paper that was released in 2006, you can see the title there. What kind of medical journal article says mystical type experiences, taking spirituality and mysticism into a medical topic? It was groundbreaking. And so he found that the majority completely lost their fear of death and gained enhanced spirituality in 1 to 2 sessions of synthetic psilocybin dosed at 20 to 30 milligrams per 70 kilograms. This title suggests a novel use for this medication. medical treatment with a dose of spirituality. It was so well received that it paved the way for the current Renaissance, as we said. But actually, the actual therapy that was done at Johns Hopkins was really informed by Dr. Stan Grof's work that occurred many years before, and also his continued breath work from that point in time, from the Controlled Substances Act time until the current day. And so this included some of his methodologies included screening and then preparation for potential contraindications, such as certain mental health conditions like borderline personality disorder, certain medications, and family history of psychosis. And then also kind of telling people, trust the inner healer. You got to embrace that. And when you see something that's really difficult and challenging, embrace it. And Dr. Lowry will be talking more about the bad concept of the bad trip. This is having somebody sitting there through you, because the bad trips sometimes are the best trips to help you get to where you need to be. It's your internal psyche telling you where you need to go. The therapy in flight is sitting in a comfortable situation with two sitters, meaningful objects, eye shades, music, and other things like that. And then also having integration post-flight is really, really important as well. So you can see what it kind of looks like. This is Mary Casamano on the right. I'm not sure who's on the left, but you can see, and this is very much how breath work looks as well. Eye shades, 1 to 2 people. You have sitters there that are just focused. And many people have never had somebody entirely focused on them. And there's a feeling of comfort that just comes from, wow, almost, indulgence of, hey, somebody's spending their entire attention on me. In group breathwork sessions, there's group music. In this case, they play music, and it's a very specially curated soundtrack that helps take them through the journey. And this is kind of what the journey looks like. And I'll talk a little bit about what one of the people said that was associated with it. I never felt like anything like it before. It's not being able to space and time, it's just being in it. Space of open healthiness and transcendence of time and space finally is talking about. So finally, in summary, after all this, is medications used in psychedelic-assisted therapy affect our default mode network. They enhance neuroplasticity. They work on different areas than most drugs of abuse, and they often have a tachyphylactic effect, as in not being capable of having physical dependence. They're from several chemical families and often create ego dissolution. So I'm going to shift over to Dr. Lowry.
All right. Thank you, Mari, for the introduction, and Brian for setting the stage. Let me start sharing here. Always tough when you have multiple people switching displays. Can you see that?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, thanks, Mari. Okay, so Mari gave a fantastic introduction. Basically, I've been doing aviation medicine for a long time, so I'm very interested in people that are in safety-sensitive positions and aviation specifically, and how do we take care of that population as well as veterans and humanity as a whole, really, in terms of trying to solve this mental health crisis. What I mean by safety-sensitive employees, these are people with access to critical information. They are often in zero tolerance for mistakes jobs like air traffic control. If you make a mistake as an air traffic controller, the results are disastrous. Oftentimes, military and law enforcement fall into this category as well. They also, this category of people often has their medical care supervised. So every time they go to get medical care, it's often reported. And so that keeps a lot of people from getting help. So that's why I'm interested. And I'm also interested in the combination of therapies that this new era is potentially producing. So I think that's exciting. This is just an overview of some of the medications that Brian has talked about. The ones on the right are obviously synthetics. And then the ones on the left are plant-based medicine. Of all of these, psilocybin is probably considered the safest. There are so many clinical trials that have happened with psilocybin since the 50s, and very few adverse outcomes, much safer than the drug we all medicate with now, which is legal, which is alcohol. So why do we care about treating safety sensitive positions and knowing about this as healthcare providers? Well, look at the number. It's astonishing, the number of clinical trials at universities wide. You can see on the map, and that's current as of May 6th. Most of these are related to mental health, and they are almost unanimously reporting excellent results. There are also tons of nonprofit private trials going on. We know that there are decriminalization efforts going on worldwide, and the use of ketamine has actually been approved in many places for treatment-resistant depression. So people are getting these treatments. And we know that even if they do have potentially access to mental health resources, we know that not everybody does. So, providing better access to mental health resources and appropriate mental health resources in terms of not just taking a pill every day to get better. So that's why we care. Also, this is brought into law. The use of these medications for clinical trials is a law now in our National Defense Authorization Act of 2024 in the US. And it's also been validated by the Veterans Administration here in the US for the treatment of veterans. So really exciting time. These are some statistics on pilots alone. And just the bottom line is pilots are a reflection of the rest of our society. Although they are highly screened, they're not immune to the mental health issues that the rest of us have. And they don't report their medical issues or their depression, their anxiety, because they are in deep fear of losing their ability to fly. It's not only a hobby, some of it's tied up with their identity, and it's definitely tied in with their livelihood. So they are fearful of anything related to mental health. So people are seeking treatments on their own and paying cash. And while we want them to get treatment, some of those treatments are not necessarily valid and clinically safe. In fact, there was a pilot in the news back in October, a US pilot who was not working at the time, took some mushrooms in the woods with his friends over the grief of a friend who had died several years back and trying to work through that. And then for some reason, he didn't sleep. He got on a plane in the cockpit as what we call a deadhead. Basically, he's not actively crew, but he's getting a ride back to where he works. And while he was in flight, he tried to shut off the engines and did some things that could have been disastrous if the pilot and co-pilot hadn't been on their feet. So, those things happen. He was not in a clinically supervised setting. He probably had some underlying issues that should have been reported to the FAA and weren't. But, things like this will continue to happen as long as recreational and underground work is happening. These are a list of emerging treatment indications for the use of psychedelic medications. And this is also true for breath work and some of the other things I'll talk about in a minute. But you can see the list. These are the major things that we are suffering from as a species, right? We're afraid of dying. We have anxiety over everything, the environment, driving, you name it. Post-traumatic stress is becoming more and more of a diagnosis as well. So if we can use these medications and the non-medical therapies for people without too many side effects and in a clinically controlled setting, why not? In fact, as Brian said, Bill Wilson from Alcoholics Anonymous said that this is mystical and groundbreaking. He said that he felt like he had a connection with a higher power that he had not had as part of AA meetings. He just wasn't that religious. But he was through LSD, he was able to find the difference between religion and spirituality. And he said, especially for those people that don't feel like they identify with a specific religion for AA, this LSD and other medications like it could be provide the therapeutic breakthrough that they needed. I tried to do a head-to-head comparison of standard SSRIs, the antidepressants that are used worldwide, between that and the psychedelic medications. And it's really difficult because the clinical trials are of varying study design. They follow different metrics. So a comparison head-to-head was very difficult. However, you can see the results, they speak for themselves. I will say that getting results for sobriety from Alcoholics Anonymous is very difficult because they are anonymous and they don't provide much data. So I don't know if I trust that statistic. But you can see that with proper therapy and proper use in clinical trials, these substances are very effective against alcohol use disorder and other substance abuse issues as well, and also effective against anxiety, depression, bipolar, and we're doing just the field seems to be increasing as well, looking at people with spinal cord injury and strokes and TBI. The psychedelics, as Brian kind of touched on, they increase your introspection and your sense of oneness with the world and with humanity. And going back to what Jim said at the beginning, you know, if more people have a sense of being part of the human race and having that sense of equality and oneness, maybe we can stop genocide. Maybe we can reduce the disastrous effects we have on the environment as humans. And maybe we can connect with one another instead of having these arguments over race and religion and politics. Anything we can do to help our society progress in that realm is helpful. These substances do not have a high abuse potential, as some organizations have said they do. They actually don't have an abuse potential. In fact, they also, when taken again clinically and in a supervised status, they actually reduce your craving for things like drugs and alcohol and food. So people that even overeat, this might be a help with obesity. Something to think about. We talk a little bit about human performance as well in the aviation community. Basically, we want to be able to fly the aircraft better and faster than the person we're competing against. If we're a ground-based special forces unit or intelligence unit, we need to analyze data, recognize patterns, and get into sort of a flow state to be able to be aware fully of our surroundings. So that flow state is what you have when all of the outside distractions and noise stops. Your default mode network kind of shuts down and you hear things you don't ordinarily hear, and you can see, and your reaction time is increased. So we highly desire that in military forces and also safety sensitive forces. We know that the Department of Defense in the United States has been using these substances for a long time and trying to figure out what is the right amount of microdose and what kinds of things is it beneficial for. Athletes are using it, private industry, you know, think about the entertainment industry. Where would we be without some of these psychedelic substances, as well as tech? We know people that do tech and they are using these as a creative platform to think outside the box. So it provides a competitive edge for people. And you can see, Brian alluded to this earlier, but a number of people that are successful and popular and have contributed to humanity, positive or negative, depending on your political background. But, you know, at the end of the day, these substances can be used in a creative and therapeutic manner. In fact, the band, the Grateful Dead, they and their audience were all on LSD and other things at that time. But if you listen to that music, you can kind of understand the different layers of the music that they were writing because of the substance that they were on. There's other emerging therapies out there. This is a picture of what vagus nerve stimulation looks like. The vagus nerve is your longest cranial nerve, and it really is the primary controller of your parasympathetic nervous system. So the opposite of fight or flight. So if we can get rid of that fight or flight mechanism, obviously we want to preserve that if there's a danger, but in our regular day, like as I'm sitting here at my desk in an office, I don't need that fight or flight. It's not productive. So if I can reduce that sympathetic tone and enhance my parasympathetic nervous system by use of an earbud or some other stimulant through my vagus nerve that comes down my neck and innervates all kinds of things between here and my gut. So we can apply this for human performance, for decreasing anxiety. There's even a study that showed that the application of vagus nerve stimulation, so enhancing that parasympathetic tone, was able to increase premature infant suckling. So, you know, there's a variety of uses I think we just aren't aware of. This doesn't have any adverse side effects. It's not a medication. So those people in safety sensitive positions might be open to this where they can't otherwise take some of these other substances. And I wanted to give credit to Jamie Tyler on that previous slide, who allowed us to borrow some images. And he is also an emerging researcher in the field of vagus nerve stimulation. And then this one was sort of a consolidation of some work that Brian Schieffer is doing. Brian is a retired military as well, a tactical air control party who was injured in a major event, had some spinal cord injury, and has dedicated the rest of his life to advocacy, patient advocacy, essentially, and looking at these emerging therapies and technologies. So one thing that's coming along nicely is the term technodelics. So these are immersive audio and video experiences designed to sort of create that, shut down your default mode network and create sort of a similar experience to psychedelics without the use of medication. The Department of Defense is using these too in the United States and other agencies as well. And you can see on the lower right, that's a military person sitting in this, it's called the Mind Gym, but it's basically a box of mirrors, and then there's light and sound inside of it, and it creates sort of a psychedelic experience, again, without the use of medications. So if you were to compare the technodelics with the psychedelics, there's still a lot of unknowns with those technological advances, but we are thinking that either alone or combined with a psychedelic or perhaps a breathwork experience, that they could provide that mystical experience. We're not quite there yet with the research, but I think it's coming. And they're emerging uses for mental health indications as well. These are used in the military to reduce stress, anxiety, and work on post-traumatic stress. And then there's other emerging treatments too. Migraine is one of them that looks like it's going to be an indication very soon. So again, if you could cure migraines without the use of a medication, why give your money to a pharmaceutical company when you can do something in the privacy and security of your own house without side effects? The psychedelics, on the other hand, unlike the technodelics, are a medication with various long-lasting half-lives from 6 to 30 hours, some of them, although some are quite short, like DMT is very quick on, quick off. Esketamine is also a rapid on, set, rapid off. But with those substances, we worry about that bad trip, and that's what keeps the aviation community concerned, is that they'll have a bad trip, they'll have flashbacks or relive the experience. It's not necessarily true. I think that was part of the anti-drug campaign back in the 60s and 70s. If you have a bad trip, chances are it's either because you have underlying mental illness that needs to be screened for, because there are some things like history of psychosis that are not compatible with taking a psychedelic, at least not right now, with the understanding that we have. Or the bad trip can also be you just weren't supervised and didn't have a support network to help you understand the things that you saw during your trip. It's uncommon to have prolonged psychosis, but it can happen greater than 48 hours after ingestion of a substance. And these lasting perceptual abnormalities or flashbacks, people say that they're not always intrusive and bad. Sometimes it's just an altered state of reality that you flip back into for a moment or two and enhanced perception, and then you go back to normal reality. Studies show that those occur in about 9% of people, which is still a little high for safety, but they're usually gone within 7 days. The effects diminish and dwindle over time. In addition to that bad trip period, during your hallucinogenic period, you're in an altered state, so you're very vulnerable. After the treatment, of course, you want to have a nice support network around you to help you integrate and understand what happened and what do you do with it? How do you apply it to yourself to have a therapeutic benefit? And then in general, we know that there's a ton of underground work going on, some of it very good, some of it irresponsible, in my opinion. So how do you find that balance? How do you know who's a good person to provide therapy and who's not? As a consumer, it's very difficult to, it's a fine line, basically. If you're using recreationally, some of these things can be laced with other substances and you just don't know what the supply chain is, right? So that's a concern. And then unsupervised recreational use in general, some people can do it recreationally and have that growth and spiritual journey and introspection, but some people really need a little bit of assistance, like that pilot I told you about earlier probably could have used some help with integration. We like the thought of enhanced safety protocols. So that, of course, is good screening, making sure that somebody isn't going to be made worse by these therapies. They're not going to be predisposed to a psychotic break, for instance. We want to make sure that they're in a safe, supervised setting. They undergo the set and setting component in advance. So we plan for the setting, we have it quiet and protected. They're not out wandering unsupervised in nature or driving a car. We want to make sure that they have a trained treatment team sitting with them. And before they start the session, we talk to them about what is the set in terms of your mindset. What are we thinking today? What are we working on? Where is your brain? How are you feeling? How's your depression? How's your anxiety? Just sort of looking at the overall human inside and out before we start a session. Screening in terms of the clinical trials, these are all doing a thorough psychiatric history, including your first and second degree relatives, so your parents, your siblings. How healthy are they from a mental health perspective, and what runs in your family? That's important to know because these things can manifest under the influence of a psychedelic, and we want to make sure that people are safe. Understanding their history, their medical history, and they're doing a physical exam is important, so that if somebody has something that might be harmed or might contribute to their demise during a session, we don't let that happen. So people with high blood pressure, for instance, we want to monitor their blood pressure during their journey so that we can ensure that they're not having an adverse reaction. And then reviewing the medications that they're taking, because some of these medications are contrary to the use of psychedelics. They can, in fact, lithium, if you use with a psychedelic, can cause seizures. So those are things we want to stay away from. The clinical trials are also doing blood work and advocating for pregnancy tests, because we don't know, nor is it ethical to find out the effects on a fetus. So definitely not being pregnant is the way to be. In terms of using these as a medication and not as just as a recreational substance, we know that there is demonstrated clinical use and efficacy. They work. And whether it works as a placebo, a fake medicine, or whether it works for real, we don't know, but we see those results study after study, and it's hard to ignore. And regardless of whether it's a placebo effect or something else going on, who cares as long as it works and it's safe. We definitely need to solve this mental health issue worldwide for people that don't have access to mental health resources because of expense or because they just don't have access. And also for people that do have access and it's just not working out, because we know that the modern medical model is failing a lot of people. We need to do some further safety testing to look at this use in a safety sensitive position. And I'm really interested in maybe doing some neurocognitive testing on people before and after the use of a substance, and try to figure out if there's a long-term neurocognitive concern in that safety sensitive population. And then we also need defined treatment protocols for the people that are not involved in a study, but the people that are actually supervising the clinical use of these substances. If you're curious about these medications or use as a medication, here are some organizations that I think are doing good, responsible work in the psychedelic space. Not limited to these, but these are definitely the ones that I think are doing their homework and setting the stage for the overall legal therapeutic use of these substances. And so in the end, I thank you for your time. I really think that these substances are just emerging faster than we can keep up with them as clinicians. And we have a lot of curiosity. We're in the process of writing some grants to get some funding so that we can work on a population that can't afford these therapies on their own. And also a veteran population is super important to us, having served with those guys for more than 30 years. It's a population that we definitely want to take care of and are committed to as well. So with that, I will stop sharing and open it up back to Jim, I guess, and Mari for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cheryl and Brian, Dr. Lowry and Dr. Pinkston. I want to be sure and just mention that how we met, because I know that you were at the Psychedelic Science Conference last June, and then Ren Butler and I had a Q&A session for Groff Studies graduate program, and you were both there, and we're both in Florida, living in Florida, and yet we were all on the Oregon coast, the three of us. And I noted that in the Q&A session. I said, what? And then like within 10 miles of each other. So we went for a hike that next day and met. And I just really appreciated that you shared your mission with me to help people, particularly veterans, with what's going on with the suicide rate. You know, and I just happened to look it up. It's about 16 to 20 veterans that is reported a day that die from suicide. Still today, you know, there hasn't really been any change. It's not getting better. So I really appreciate that is your mission as part of what we're doing, you know, each in our own different ways. And that just mental health in general, especially for active military veterans and airmen in general, is around 35-40%. And like I was saying, we know 1 in 5 at least is an issue in mental health from a general society perspective. So it's significantly higher. And then that just recently in the beginning of this year, Cheryl and Brian have had this mission to start a clinic to expand on their FAA medical examiner practice with pilots to open to offering psychedelics, LS or the esketamine, and then offering a lot of integration, because we really feel like that combination, the support, and making sure people know that we care and that we're willing to walk with them through the process of healing is really important. So it's just such a great pleasure to work with both of you. And on to you, Dr. Garrison. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Cheryl. As someone who's been using psychedelics for a very, very long time, and also counts Stan Groff and others as close friends that have been in this movement. It's really gratifying to see the level of sophistication that you're bringing to this enterprise. It's as if we're undergoing, and this is the comment, we don't have a lot of time before we go into the after chat, but it feels to me that we're in a sort of a renaissance. There was this initial burst in the 60s, and then, as you pointed out, Brian, 1970s, they shut it all down and it went subterranean. And then it's begun its ascent back into the culture as its efficacy has been absolutely undeniable, even to government bureaucrats. And now it's kind of percolating up, and there's the decriminalization movement. There's several countries, as you know, that have decriminalized all of it, and they find that it doesn't really have that, huge catastrophic effect that some people feared, and so it feels to me that we're moving into a new space of acceptability, and not only recreational use but therapeutic use by an establishment that is desperate to find therapies that actually work, and the psychedelics actually do. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that in and get your comments on this renaissance that what we seem to be entering.
I think it's a beautiful time. We have to be really careful with how we approach it, though. At the same time, I don't agree with exactly with the medical model, and that's one of the things that the three of us are working on. Is there needs to be some ceremony and some these are powerful tools and sacred tools many times as well, and you have to appreciate all that. And at the same time, there's all that in there. The one comment I'd like to make too is listen to Dr. Matt Johnson out of Johns Hopkins. He was talking about they're talking about suicidality in they were talking about getting the drug, one of these drugs, FDA approved, and the FDA said, "Have you thought about trying it in teenagers?" And he's like, "No, no, no." And they said, "No, actually, there's a great suicidality. You should think about that." So that's where the government's now going, but we have to be very, very careful.
Yeah. Proceed with utmost caution. They may change their minds. Cheryl, what would be your comment? And then Mari.
Well, I just think that we have so much therapeutic benefit that can be had, and it's really an exciting time to finally see some of the research uncovered that has been done underground for a long time during this hiatus of debatable legal status. And it was both heartening and terrifying to go to the MAPS conference. Heartening in the sense that there's so much good research being done and people whose heart is really in the game and wanting to heal. But there's also a lot of people that don't have a solid background that are potentially using these substances in a dangerous way through trying to heal and wear the title of healer. And those are the ones that concern me. So I do believe that MAPS and some of the organizations are trying to weed the wheat from the chaff and reestablish these as safe substances without, if we use it recreationally and use it wrongly, it'll be in the media and it'll be gone again. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of didn't hear exactly what you said, Jim. So I'm just trying to follow along, and forgive me because my brain is a little scattered. But what I want to say is that I think, like I was saying when I presented, is that to me, Stan Grof's, not only, all of his research, but his context is so helpful for implementing and integrating these processes so you can find meaning, and everybody's going to draw differently from that, right? It's all going to be different for everybody. Some people, they'll be drawn to the archetypal connection, the transpersonal realms. Some people will be drawn more to the basic perinatal matrix with the birth process or somatic healing. And I think in all of it, though, that context is important. I'm just saying this because I remember this woman that I met that was a tantric, teacher, tantra, and she did breath work as well, some sort of like tantric breath work. And we were comparing, and I was talking about context. She said, "I don't care about context. I just want the experience of the ecstaticum." Like that was her whole focus. And I was just like, that's not it for me. But I mean, not to say we don't enjoy that. I just don't think that that's the whole get all. And it's not as near as helpful for healing and having meaning in the process.
Well, I think you're making a very important point that I again like to have all of your comments on. I think remembering in my experience in the 60s in the Vietnam War and so forth and so on, I think that what's ultimately terrifying to the prevailing elites is how the psychedelics open one up, as you say, Mari, in a highly differentiated way. So if you have a culture that's, wanting to get everybody regimented so you can send the young men off to war, and they're taking LSD and psilocybin and, putting flowers in their hair and doing moon dances, by the river, they don't make very good soldiers. And so there's this built-in tension between the liberation that the psychedelics effectuate on virtually everybody, even if you have a bad trip, and the fact that the culture needs conformity in order to maintain stability. So even though they're tiptoeing in around the therapeutic use, it's really, and I think they understand that, it's really a Trojan horse. And so I just would love to conclude with your comments on this, because I think what we're dealing with psychedelics and the medicine plants that nature so bountifully provides is the ultimate revolutionary catalyst to liberate the human species and mind to who we really are. And that is cosmic stardust in relationship with everything else. So please comment as we close. Mari?
Sure. Yeah, I would like to just point out that Jung had his lectures of psychology of the Kundalini Yoga back in 1932. And in those lectures, there's the book that I wrote my dissertation about with the chakras that collectively he felt that we were just at that time in 1932 moving into the heart space energy. We're talking about elements, the air element and the heart space chakra collectively. That we, because the root, the sacral, and the solar are all just more of our connection to the material realms and matter. And then these other upper chakras are more into this ethereal consciousness type of space. And that he talked about the throat chakra, particularly is the ethereal, that at some point we would reach that level. And he didn't know how long it would be, but I feel like we've arrived in that ethereal aspect of consciousness where it's legitimate, it's accepted. People are, we're doing the research, Irvin Lazo, the Akashic field, Stan Groff's not ordinary states of consciousness. So yeah, I feel like that it's all happening now.
Cool. Brian, why don't you take a cut at it, and then Cheryl.
I'll do it quickly. As we do other practices and get closer and closer, and these are tools to unlock what we already have within us. And as we start to understand and perceive, we realize that we are part of the oneness, and you can't hurt others if they're yourself. So that, I think that's a cure for society's ills, is to understand the similarities between us and understand what Dr. Groff would say is, be curious about the manifestation of consciousness that's in somebody else that is different from you. We need to be one versus different, and society tends to separate us. The other thing is, we don't need to protect Mother Earth. We came from her. She will take care of herself, and we're looking forward to Teotihuacan. We'll see you there. But we need to protect ourselves. We came from that. We have to honor that, and by doing that, we protect ourselves and take care of each other. That's all. Thanks.
So you're going to be in Teo? Oh, far out. I really look forward to meeting you. Very much so. Very much so. Cool. Cool. Thank you so much. And that reminds me, everyone, we're just about sold out for Teotihuacan. That's going to take place in the Great Pyramid Complex outside of Mexico City between the 16th and the 22nd of June. The Kogi elders are coming. The Toltec elders are coming. It's going to be an extraordinary consecration on the solstice on top of the Pyramid of the Sun. We've gotten special permission. So anyone that still wants to come, go to ubiquityuniversity.org onto our in-person courses, and you can sign up from there. Thanks for the reminder, Brian. And I look forward to seeing both of you in just a few weeks, actually, in Teo. Thank you, Mari. As always, thank you for your convening this session. You can join these three distinguished individuals in the after chat for a little bit. You'll see the link in the chat box. You received it in your Zoom reminder. Have a good weekend, and then we commence next week. We're going to dive back into the realm of extraterrestrial contact. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.